Camilla, thank you. Thank you very much. Camilla, thank you for that gracious invitation. You did your homework. Although we'll have to change our website. We used to be all volunteer. Well, fortunately, we've actually gotten some grants now. We have a couple. We have one full-time employee and a couple interns. But thank you all for coming. This is a real treat for me as in my role at PACE. I've done this in lots of towns, but I'm really nervous about doing it in Simsbury. You all know me. You know where I live, right? So I would like to make this conversation, right? So particularly as I'm going along, if there's something you didn't understand, let's, please raise your hand and let's talk about it, right? If we want to debate stuff, we'll do that afterwards. But if you didn't understand or, just want a clarification, I don't think you want to listen to me speak nonstop for 45 minutes. So please, let's make this a conversation. So I'm going to cover three things tonight. One is what is the climate crisis? What is climate change? Just some definitions. I think we all know most of this, but it's good maybe to just review and have some terms in our head. And then what can I do as an individual, and what can I do as a community? And our focus at PACE is working with communities, working with towns, helping them, as you'll see, do some analysis of our energy usage in town, looking at what that could be like in a 100% renewable, sort of imagining the end state we need to get to, and then working our way backwards from there. So that's really the approach. Great. So we hear a lot about the climate, and I think, first of all, what is climate change? I think it's good to just have an understanding in our head. It's really two things, right? It's global warming, which is driven by our emissions of greenhouse gases, and it is the resulting large-scale shifts in weather patterns, right? It's also good to keep in mind, we hear a lot, particularly at the national level in some of the debate about, climate change can't be that bad because it's so cold, or global warming can't be that bad because it's really cold today, and I even got a snowball in my hand, and so, weather is your precipitation, your temperature, your patterns and we can predict weather for a couple of days maybe, right? Climate is the longer term pattern of those features. We like to use the analogy, weather is the card that you pull from the deck. Climate is the deck of cards, right? And the deck of cards is changing. The other distinction I think is important to keep in mind when we talk about the greenhouse effect, because there is a greenhouse effect, and it's basically this layer around the Earth's atmosphere that traps greenhouse gases. And we're thankful for that. There is a natural if we didn't have that greenhouse, the temperatures would drop to below where we could live. So that greenhouse effect protects us. But the problem is we've put too much, 150 years ago, or in the Industrial Revolution, we launched this grand experiment, digging up all the carbon and putting it into the air. And so we're pumping carbon into the air, and that's causing a man-made or an anthropogenic climate change. And I want to point out the slides are a little bit word heavy. They're also available as a handout, right? So if there's any, and I like to include lots of links and stuff. So if anybody wants these, I'll make sure to get them to Camilla. I think we kind of know what the impacts of climate change, or some of them, but it's worth, let me close that thing, maybe listing them, because we talk about global warming, and we used to say global warming, but it's a lot more than global warming. There will be warming in some places, but overall, that is the phenomenon, an overall warming of the air and the water temperature. It's also leading to sea level rise, melting of Arctic ice, changes in precipitation patterns. We're already seeing that. More extreme weather in both directions, right? Dry and wet. Stronger, more intense hurricanes. Scientists are getting better at actually attributing the effect of climate, specific events, and looking at what the probability of that thing happening with and without climate change. And they can actually point causation now to maybe not to single events, but to patterns, right? The ocean is becoming more acidic and lower oxygen, and parts of the Earth are becoming uninhabitable, right? So those are kind of the impacts of, and there are others, but these are sort of the main ones. So it's not just global warming, right? It's a lot of things happening to this planet. And feedback loops and tipping points are a really interesting phenomena that I think is worth taking a moment. So we talked about, we've launched this great experiment of digging up all of the world's carbon that was in the ground and putting it into the air. And what's happening? Well, the atmospheric content, the carbon CO2 content of the air, the atmosphere is increasing. So there's a measuring station out in the ocean in Hawaii, Mauna Loa. It's been recording the CO2 in the atmosphere since 1958. You can see the pattern, right? It's a steady, you can see the annual increase from vegetation, right, from winter to summer, but the trend is very clear. So you might ask, well, gee, haven't we had cycles like this over the past, right? And if you look at these are not direct measurements, but if they look at ice cores, they can actually go back and look at the CO2 content in the atmosphere, and you can see there have been fluctuations. But what we're doing now is simply unprecedented. It is on a scale unlike anything that we've seen in any natural cycles. The vertical axis here, I'm going to try my new gadget here. I've got a, does this work? So yeah, the vertical, isn't that cool? The vertical axis is parts per million of carbon. And anybody ever heard of the organization 350.org? Started by Bill McKibben and very active in the state, including. And does anybody know how they got 350, why they picked that name? That's the level of carbon, of CO2 in the atmosphere beyond which life is, they said at the time, not sustainable. And where are we today? Well, I checked it the other day. It's 416.9, right? And rising, and rose through the pandemic, right? One interesting, well, it's not so much interesting as concerning element of climate change is that we have baked a certain amount of these emissions and the impacts into what we're doing. Even if we were to stop emitting carbon immediately, we would still see a continued impact. It's sort of a baked-in effect, right? So we need to prepare for, even if we do the right thing, things will probably get worse before they get better. At least that's my understanding. Surface temperatures are increasing. Red is land, blue is sea, both increasing. And again, I don't have it here. All this goes all the way back to 1880. Right? So this is, and I think there are charts that go back even further. Again, unprecedented increases in overall temperature. Oh, and there it is. There's the older. So that's the chart going further back. And again, taking not direct measurements, but you can see again, we are experiencing temperature increases now beyond any natural cycles that we've seen. And there's actually conversation going on in Egypt right now. You may be following the COP27. And they've had this standard of a 1.5 degree temperature increase since industrial level. And they're talking about basically dropping that because there's no way we're going to get, I think we're basically at 1.5 now. And 1.5 doesn't sound like much, right? You know, so it's on a summer day, instead of 86, it's 88, or in the winter, instead of, gosh, maybe 42, it's going to be a little warmer. So what's the big deal, right? Well, the big deal is when we talk about weather, there's a distribution, right? And if you're familiar with any statistical distribution, right, you've got a sort of a point in the middle, it's the average, and it has a high probability, right? There's a lot, and then as you go to the lower and the higher temperatures, the probability tapers off. So this line shows the probability of something happening. So here's where we were, previous climate, and then as we shift the climate, not just the weather, but the climate, that whole curve shifts. So what happens is this little bit right here, this triangle right here, is so if this is hot, everything above hot, that triangle right there shows what we used to get in hot weather, right? What's that now? Now that the pattern is shift, it's this whole triangle. So that little shift in temperature leads to a massive shift in the tail, right? So we're having a lot more hot weather, and if you look at the stuff over here, before it basically never happened. Now we're seeing more extreme events and a lot more hot events. Right? So a little shift in the distribution in the climate can actually have a very profound impact on the weather, on what we actually experience. Feedback loops and tipping points kind of scare me. A feedback loop is where something happens, it has an impact on something else, that has an impact on something, and then it has an impact back on that first thing. So it can kind of provide feedback, and it can go positive or negative. So here's two examples. One is the ice albedo effect, which is as the climate gets warmer, it melts the Arctic ice or ice. My watch talks to me sometimes. Can you hear me all, by the way? Yep, good. So as the climate warms, ice melts, that leads to warmer, so the ocean can then absorb more heat. That actually leads to more ice melting, and that leads to a warmer Earth, which then again leads to more melting. So that is a positive feedback loop where one thing leads to another, and then it comes back. That same effect now comes back and reinforces itself, right? A negative feedback loop is the next one, cloud, just simply clouds, right? The more clouds we have, the warmer the climate becomes. The warmer the climate becomes, and there's more water in the atmosphere. So actually, I think I started that one wrong. Let me start over. As the climate warms, it leads to more water in the atmosphere. More water in the atmosphere leads to more clouds. More clouds leads to less sun, so it actually reduces the warming. So that the feedback actually reduces the warming. Right? There's a warming, but it leads to more clouds, which actually comes back. So that actually is more of a stable situation where something happens, but then it sort of negates its impact. Right? The scary part is the tipping point, where are these hard to predict points where potentially that feedback loop could accelerate and get to a point where we won't be able to stop it, right? Where we can no longer control the natural processes. And you know, I've had a career in insurance. I've done a lot of financial modeling. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an atmospheric modeler, but I've built lots of models. All models are wrong. Some are useful. And I don't know if our models are good enough to predict tipping points, right? To where, like, if Greenland fell into the ocean, or if a huge piece of the Antarctic shelf fell off, would that not trigger a cycle that we might not be able to stop? So I don't know, but it's a concept that is really worth, and there's some good examples here you can follow. So that's really, I think, climate change. Any questions before we sort of jump in? And I think you all knew pretty much all that, but it's good to, I think, have a common understanding. Because that's why we're here, right? I don't think if we were dealing with climate change, I'd be here. So what can we do? Please.
Who do you feel has the best pulse on the latest, because people, some people made certain predictions 5 years ago.
Yep.
And, now they're changing it one way or the other.
Yep.
So, is there
that's a great
you feel that is really more on top of it than?
Well, that's a great question. I actually have a slide that I pulled out because we don't have that much time tonight. Who can you believe, right? Because there are deniers, there are skeptics, and you find all kinds of information. For me, the answer is simple. Imagine we on the planet said, well, let's get our best scientists together to figure this out. Let's put them all in a room, and they don't have to do original research. Just let them read all the papers, the peer-reviewed science, and advise us. And that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's started, I don't have that slide in front of me. I want to say in the 40s, could be wrong. And they have been issuing reports. They just issued their 7th. Do I have that in here? No, I don't have it in here, but we can come back to it. So to me, I don't know the ability of the ocean to retain acidity. I don't know how much CO2 is right in the atmosphere. I'm going with the scientists. And if you follow the reports of the IPCC, they are increasingly dire. So that's my answer, is I'm going with the scientists. And everybody's got a crackpot theory about this, but I'm going with the peer-reviewed science, right? So we're going to talk about what we can do personally and then what we can do as a community. So personally, and really we're going to, before we just jump into, should I start changing my light bulb and get a heat pump and drive an electric car? Let's think about what we're trying to accomplish, right? And the vision that we're suggesting here is really has four components. First of all, efficiency, right? There's no way we can build enough solar and wind to produce the amount of energy we're using today. And we don't need to use the amount of energy we're using today. Our houses are horribly drafty. Our roofs are not insulated. So efficiency, before we do anything else, we have to become more efficient, right? So best way to do that, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, is get a home energy solutions audit, right? So efficiency is, so let's not just figure out how much energy we're using and then build solar and wind to do it. We're going to have to reduce first. Second of all, we're going to have to electrify everything. We have been burning fossil fuels. We've been putting carbon into the air now. It's not hard. We just have to stop doing that. Conceptually, it's not hard. But when it gets to, that means no more gasoline, so we need to electrify our cars. That means no more propane, heating oil, or natural gas, eventually, right? And that's hard. That's a lot of changes in our lives, so we're not going to accomplish that overnight. But really, we're talking about, if we're all using electric vehicles, heating and cooling appliances, and the grid is getting its energy from solar and wind, and Connecticut has committed to a carbon neutral grid by 2040. They put that in statute this year in session. Then we're just moving electrons around. We're taking electrons from the sun and the wind and some hydro, and we're running electric appliances, electric vehicles and heat pumps. So that's the sort of the end state. So we're going to become more efficient. We're going to electrify everything, and then we're going to produce energy with renewable sources, and that's for us primarily solar photovoltaic, right? And for the state, what we'll see, over the next, the coming years, is a lot more solar and a lot more offshore wind. It's very exciting what is happening off the East Coast, right? We've got these federal leases. We have an excellent wind resource off the East Coast, right? One of the nice things is the shelf of the ocean does not fall off that. So it's very shallow. If you've seen, there's 5 wind turbines down off Block Island. They're actually mounted to the floor of the ocean. And big federal leases have been sold off on the East Coast. So federal land or federal property that big, large utility companies have bought. And there's Revolution Wind, there's Vineyard Wind. In the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see massive deployments of offshore wind, which is incredible. It's a game changer, actually, because it's enough to shut down our nuclear, and it's enough, it complements solar really well, because the wind blows in the winter, and the wind blows at night, and solar doesn't do well in those 2 times. So the third part is we're going to get all of our energy, and that's some of us are going to have it on our roof and next to our house, and solar canopies that we park our cars under. We're going to have large-scale arrays, but it's going to end, in the end, it's going to all be coming from the wind, water, and sun. And then the last piece, as we make these changes, we have to address the historical imbalances and inequities that have been built into the system. So as we insulate our homes, and you're going to see this in the Inflation Reduction Act, the rebates for lower and moderate income are much better than for those who don't need it. Right? So as we build a new energy infrastructure, let's not do it just the way we did it. Let's address the communities that have been underserved, that have been burdened by living in these areas where the power plants were, where the mines were, and the substandard housing where people live in the city and don't have any control over the weatherization and have a high energy burden. I sit in on lots of webinars and meetings about energy issues. I don't think there's a single meeting where equity is not mentioned, right? So as we're making these changes, we need to not just do it the way we used to, but really address those inequities. So here are some steps that each of us can take. We can, of course, put solar on our roof. We can replace our gas stove or whatever kind of stove we have with induction. They're all electric. They're super fast. Everybody I talk to who has one loves it. And you're not burning gas in your home, which is increasingly an issue. We talked about efficiency. Replace your drafty windows and doors. You can switch to a heat pump, and we'll talk about that a little bit. You can insulate better your attic and walls and basement. Replace your inefficient dryer with a heat pump dryer. Get a HESS audit. HESS is a Home Energy Solutions audit. Consider installing a battery backup. That's not a big deal, but we can talk about that. That might that does have some features that are appealing. Consider making your next car an EV. An EV is electric vehicle. And by the way, EV, that term, when you see an article where they're counting the number of electric vehicles, they're typically counting battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. Those are considered EVs. Because a plug-in hybrid is basically an EV. You're going to drive on electric most of the time. People who have, depending on the battery capacity, and then eventually it shifts over to your gas engine. But a regular hybrid is not considered an EV, but a plug-in hybrid. And that's not a decision we make easily, right? So that's something we want to be sort of planning. And then electrify our home. So I'm going to go into a couple of these in a little more detail. And again, please jump out. Home energy solutions is the most important thing each of us could do. All right? Call 1-800-WISE, 1-877-WISE-USE. It's on here somewhere, 877-WISE-USE. Or call any HVAC contractor. And it's the best deal you're probably ever going to get. It's $50, or if you're income eligible, it's free. And they will come in, and actually, I'm not going to tell you what they do because my colleague at PACE, Deb, has made a video. Let me see if I can start this. Can I get that to start?
Is that on the website?
It is, I think. I'm going to have to start that from here.
Hi, this is Deb with PACE, and I just wanted to share.
For the audio on this, is that going to, if I just turn the audio, will that work?
Audio is coming. You can hear it.
Can you hear her? No, you can't hear her, right? Of this video, it's coming through HDMI, but that doesn't do audio, right? This is not going to work, I don't think.
Hi, this is Deb with PACE, and I just wanted to share the results of my recent home energy solutions audit that I had. And to tell you the truth, I wish I'd done it a lot earlier. The certified energized CT techs come out, and
she does a much better job. But home energy solutions audit is the other thing you need to know. You've already paid for it, right? If you look at your electric bill each month, there's a charge for efficiency services, and that goes towards these programs that the utility runs. And this one is when you order a HES audit, home energy solutions audit, they will come to your house. They will do a blower door test, right? They'll put up the cover on the door and pressurize the house and measure how leaky it is. They will actually do weather stripping. They will do some weatherization. They used to do LED bulbs. I don't know if they still do. They will swap out your shower heads if you want them to. They will do some air sealing throughout the house. And they will leave you with a booklet of rebates and coupons. And they are very, very valuable right now. Insulation is almost free. It is literally almost free right now. I mean, it's like a $2 rebate per square foot, I think, or something. So it's very, very rich. If you haven't done an HES audit, or if you did one more than 3 years ago, you can do another, and follow through on the things that they suggest, right? We did one. We got one of those styrofoam covers for the pull-down stairs in the attic, right? And there's all kinds of little things like there, and coupons for heat pump hot water heaters and heat pumps, and very, very valuable. So get a HES audit. That's the first thing to do, I think. Sorry we couldn't hear Deb do that, but I should have planned ahead on how the audio comes through. So solar. I think everybody knows a lot about solar, so I'm not going to go through this page in general, but there are some great resources from the Green Bank, right? Where you can find an installer. You can learn all about the programs, how you get compensated for solar. And there are different ways, right? One way is you buy the panels and you own them. The other way is what they call a power purchase agreement. So you put no money down. A company comes in, they put it on your roof. They own it, they insure it, they maintain it. You just agree to buy the electricity from them. And it will invariably be less than you're paying today, and it will lock you into a nice rate. So there are lots of options for solar. If you have pretty good, if your roof is in good condition and you don't have too much shade, this is an excellent investment these days. And the incentives are actually back to where they were. I think it's a 30% federal tax credit, and so if you don't have too much shade, solar is a great investment. Heat pumps. So solar is an easy conversation to have, right? We did a program in town called Solarize in 2014 where we picked one installer. I think it was in this room where we had a workshop, and they can come look at your house. They can even do it from Google Earth, right? They can look at your house and they give you a quote for solar. And it's fairly easy to do. You could pretty much do it, unless your roof is about to be replaced, you can pretty much do it any time, right? And it's not that invasive to your house. Whereas a heat pump, you start talking about a heat pump and the conversation becomes complicated. What do you have now? You have oil, propane, gas. Do you have radiators? Do you have air ducts? How old is the system? And it's not as easy as getting a solar quote and just saying yes or no, right? So that's why we say, instead of the headline isn't go out and buy a heat pump, the headline is plan. Plan your transition to a heat pump. Because when your oil burner goes, or your gas furnace, or your propane, it's probably going to be in February. The pipes have burst. That's not the time to start to research heat pumps, right? So think it through. Heat pumps are much more efficient than any other heating and cooling source out there. A heat pump doesn't create heat, it doesn't burn anything, it moves heat. So it's like your refrigerator. It's the same principle as your refrigerator. It's that refrigerant cycle. So it basically, even on a cold winter day, it will pull heat out of the air and bring it into your house. And in the summer, it will pull the heat out of the house and push it out to the air. Right? So it's actually, it's like an air conditioner that runs in both directions. Typically, you can't just get rid of your oil burner and put in a heat pump with the same BTU capacity. So at the time you're doing a heat pump, you also want to weatherize. You want to do the insulation. You want to do the air sealing, look at your windows, right? But heat pumps are, we talk about efficiency. A heat pump, let's start with a gas furnace. Absolute state-of-the-art, modern, combined cycle, or actually probably that's the wrong term, but a really modern gas boiler. Somebody might know better than I, 95% efficient, right? So 95% of the energy content of that fuel gets turned into heat. Heat pumps have efficiencies of 200 to 300%, which seems kind of impossible. But again, you're not creating heat, you're just moving it around. It's finding heat and bringing it in. So heat pumps are extremely efficient, but they're not easy to retrofit, right? So it takes some planning. What people often do is they'll get that first heat pump, right? So for the kitchen, for the grand room, right, or the addition, right, or maybe that room with the kitchen and the family where you spend 90% of your life, get a heat pump there. That's going to significantly lower your bill. Trying to do the whole house may work easily for you, or it may not. But eventually, if we're going to address climate change, we all need to look for a way to be bringing this technology in, right? And the other point I would make, and I'll come back to you, Melissa, is don't get rid of your gas boiler yet. Don't get rid of your propane yet. Keep it as a backup, right? Get your heat pump, keep your system, and eventually, as you weatherize and as heat pumps become even better and better, you can get rid of the system. But heat pumps are, I would say, probably the hardest piece of the puzzle, right? Solar, we all understand, and you can do solar. Electric vehicles, we're seeing electric vehicles, and they're coming, and they're a variety, and they're getting less and less expensive. You talk to an HVAC contractor, half of them will try and talk you out of a heat pump, right? Because they don't, for one, they don't know this technology as well. And two, many of them have made their life selling you propane and oil, and they don't get to do that if they install a heat pump. So this is a very hard part of the puzzle to really solve. Melissa?
That was actually my question. Is there average HVAC guy in town have heat pump technology, and are local businesses able to do this for us?
Valley in town, I know they do heat pumps, yeah. I don't know that they're a heat pump specialist, right? But yeah, they do them. They do them. Yeah. But we're gonna need a lot more HVAC contractors and electricians. There's a great, if you do end up getting these slides and look at it, there's a great, so the link at the bottom, explanation of heat pumps by This Old House. right? And those guys are great.
So this is showing the air source.
Yep.
Heat pump, which getting the equipment is much less expensive.
Right.
For ground source, which was even way more efficient.
Yep.
Is there, have you seen where, like a neighborhood might invest in basically the well? If the well system is, the way to go.
That is state of the art right there. So air source heat pumps, the source of the heat or the cold is the air, right? So it's this compressor sitting outside. And even on a really cold day, if you walk over to that thing, its coil is going to be colder than the air, right? And it's doing that by vaporizing this refrigerant inside, right? It's a phase change, so it gets very cold. So the heat, because it gets so cold, heat actually moves into it, and then it brings it into the house. So and then it does the reverse in the summer. So it's using the air, the heat in the air, right? And even on a very cold winter day, it'll get the heat it needs. It's not as efficient when it gets that cold, but they do work, right? Ground source uses either digs a well or does a shallower set of trenches and gets the heat from the water. Because if you drill deep enough, the water's always 50 degrees, right? So you pump some water up and down. We just saw a facility that was geothermal. Much more efficient because you don't need to heat from that outside temperature to 68 degrees. You just need to heat from like 50, 55 degrees. But geothermal is very expensive. Great long-term investment if you can make a long-term investment. That's why you see schools. Westminster's got a wonderful system in some of the places that can make a longer-term investment. Similar to a heat pump is a heat pump hot water heater. So again, instead of heating your water by either burning something or using a electric resistance, which is basically a toaster, you are using a heat pump, right? So you are pulling the heat out of the basement, wherever you have this thing, and putting it into your water. So they're much more efficient. They can be noisy, so you don't want to put them in the living space. And if the basement is really, really cold, they're probably not a good idea. They do have the advantage of drying the space, of dehumidifying your space as well. So they're generally a very, very good investment. So consider that's a low-hanging fruit. And again, the rebates for this, not only in the existing programs, but in what's coming in the Inflation Reduction Act, are very, very rich. All right.
Are they more efficient than the instant-on hot water?
Oh, that's a good question.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, are heat pump hot water heaters more efficient than sort of on-demand systems? I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, I mean the on-demand, would be more efficient because it's not heating water you're not using.
Heat the pipes all.
And what I've heard is the electric on-demand can't quite cut it. So they typically are propane or gas or something. I don't know the answer to that.
It is more efficient.
The on-demand, yeah.
The
heat pump is more.
Yeah.
So. Electric vehicles are pretty exciting, and it's worth sort of planning ahead, right? Because these are obviously big purchases. But what's exciting is the variety that we're seeing now. And what's interesting is the lifetime cost of an electric vehicle is about at parity now, right? So they're more expensive up front, right? Although the prices are coming down. What is an Equinox? 28,000 or something like that? Anyway, the prices are coming down, and we're pretty much at the point where they're also a good investment, where they make economic sense, right? They are more expensive up front, but your operating costs are much lower. So, and boy, there's a variety, and the variety coming out right now is amazing. But what this graph shows you is this sort of cloud at the bottom are electric cars. So the vertical axis here is your carbon dioxide emissions, and the horizontal axis is your average cost. So the ones up top are your high emission cars. The ones at the bottom are your low emission, so your electrics are all here. But they're also in the lower cost. This is the lifetime operating cost. They're also on the left side of the curve here. So a lot of electric cars are already more economical to run than their internal combustion engine. And I think at some point people are going to think twice about investing in an expensive luxury internal combustion engine car, wondering what the resale is going to be on that thing. Right? So I think this is happening, right? I think solar's happening. The prices of solar have come down so much. The prices of EVs are coming down. The prices of batteries are coming down. So this is happening. The hard one's heat pumps, I think. Take time sometime if you haven't done it and look at your carbon footprint. Right? There are a bunch of websites. We've linked one here where you can see, you look at your heating and cooling, you look at your travel habits, look at your eating habit, and you put in all this information and it tells you. And you're probably going to be somewhere up around over 10 to 15 tons of greenhouse gas per year. The experts, and if you look around the world, we are so far above most countries in the world, right? We really need to be aiming as more like 2. Right? So, but it's worth looking at because you can see sort of where some of your sources of, what's that flight? How does that compare to my heating CO2? And food is an interesting one, right? This just shows the carbon footprint of different, I think these are all different foods. And there are, of course, significant differences, right? So I think at some point that's something for us to consider as well. Does our diet, and even smaller changes in our diet, can that be part of the solution as well? Catherine Hayhoe is somebody who I'd commend to you. She is an atmospheric scientist at Texas Tech. She's an evangelical Christian. She's written a book called Saving Us, which is really, really wonderful. And she says, let me just tell you briefly what she says. It says the most important thing we can do is talk about climate change. So as you're talking to people, find something that you share, right? You might find somebody who doubts climate change or something. Maybe they love to ski, or maybe they're hunters. I had an experience with this recently where we kind of got into a discussion, and it turns out, he's a hunter and they grow their own food. He's got a much lower carbon footprint than I do, right? So I admire it. So you find a common, but come to an understanding. I'd like to just play a little. Oh, I can't because I don't have audio. Anyway, get the slides. She is a delightful human being. She's a beautiful writer, and she is just effervescent. And her point is, the more of us talk about it, and not in a preachy way, but just sharing our value. This is important to me, and I want you to know it, because I like to hike, and I like to ski, and we're not going to be able to ski anymore. I like to go to the beach, but the seas are rising. So what is it important to you? Or you want to hand the world down to your children. So talk about it. That's what Catherine Hayhoe says. And I don't see anybody here, seniors, but there is this new organization that Bill McKibben is an environmentalist, and he has started this organization. He's co-founded this organization called Third Act, and he's basically talking about people who have retired, they've had careers, they have time on their hands, they might have some financial wherewithal, they've got expertise, they've got skills that they've learned, and he's saying this group needs to pull their weight, right? And to some extent they do. A lot of meetings you go to, the young people don't have time, they're raising kids or they're building their careers. It is a lot of retired people, but we are a powerful, if this group got mobilized, I think it would even be more powerful. And we could consider taking some kind of a pledge, right? So when you leave here today, and I will commit to moving my home and transportation options to 100% renewable energy by taking immediate steps available to me and planning to take additional steps as options become available. I further commit to sharing my pledge with my family and friends. I will inventory everything I own or use, which uses fossil fuels. So I'll look at my car, my gas cooktop, our heating system. I'll look at my leaf blower, all those things, and say, maybe I can switch over, maybe the technology is not there yet, but I'm going to look. I'm going to consider how can I get these things out of my life. In the next 6 months, I will take all the steps which have little or no upfront costs. I will help develop the 100% renewable economy. And when I have work done on my building, I will consider what energy efficiency and renewable energy improvements can cost effectively be made at the same time. So there are other versions of pledges out there, but I think that's a pretty good one. And I think that's, and then there's some more resources. There is a copy in the back of this thing I've linked to here. An organization called NEP, Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships, has put together a really nice buying guide for air source heat pumps. So that's linked to here. You can download it. And if you want any information on this new Inflation Reduction Act that was passed in Congress, $400 billion investment in basically climate. The last two links here are excellent, including the bottom one is a calculator where you go in and again, you answer some questions and it'll say, well, you can get $500 for a heat pump water heater. You can get $800 to upgrade your electrical service. You can get $8,000 for your heat pump, right? It's all in there, what you and your income level and your needs situation. So that calculator, this is all, the last two are by this organization called Rewiring America, which of course are all about electrifying. And they got a book. Did I link to that? I think that's further on. There's a guide that they, very readable guide, but Rewiring America is a very good. So anyway, if you get the slides, there's some more information for you. I think that's it on what we can do individually. And I know it's a, what's that?
Where's the link to the slide?
If I give it, what's the best way to get that to people? My card is in the back. I'll email them to you, or if I get them to the land trust, is there a way of, people didn't register, right? So if we get them to Diana.
Your presentation's going to be online too.
The actual video, yeah.
I think that the slides should be there. So
Yeah, can you put a PDF of my presentation on the land trust website?
yeah.
Okay, let's do that so that you can go get these. Because I know they're not so much fun reading it here, but I like to make it a resource for. So any other questions about what we can do, Mark?
Is nuclear considered clean?
So I am proud and honored to be president of People's Action for Clean Energy, which is about a 45-year-old organization that was started in Middletown, Connecticut to resist a nuclear plant being built there. They succeeded, I guess, because there isn't one there. And PACE was led for over 40 years by Judy Friedman. And a very strong anti-nuclear ethos of that organization. We don't talk a lot about nuclear, right? Nuclear is very much divides the environmental community, right? For some, and Connecticut counts nuclear as zero carbon, right? So we like to brag that we're, where are we, like 50% carbon free? Well, that's because half of our energy comes from millstone. So yes, nuclear is generally very, very low carbon, right? I'm concerned about nuclear because of the catastrophic potential. Right? We've seen a couple of events. What if something were to happen in Waterford, Connecticut to Millstone, right? It's unimaginable, right? So I don't think we want to take that risk. So personally, I am opposed to nuclear. But you know what? Down the road, who was I listening to the other day? And they were an environmentalist saying we will need nuclear. I don't know. At some point, 10, 20 years from now, I don't think we need nuclear. I'm a big student of Mark Jacobson from Stanford, who has done the math and shown that we can do it all with wind, water, and sun, right? So I don't think we need nuclear. I'd rather do it without, but my guess is we're probably not going to do it fast enough, and we're going to need a bunch of nuclear to not, but we'll see. But it scares me,
Yeah, when you say doing it fast enough, you mentioned the mandate in Connecticut of being carbon neutral by 2040.
The grid, yep.
The grid.
The electric grid.
And, I've been reading for some time now about a lot of climate organizations saying that we've got to do this by 2030. Isn't there a 10-year disparity there? And is there any way that we can do better?
Yeah, great question. I think the sixth IPCC, this Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, I think their sixth report said we had 12 years. I mean, they're all estimates, right? And I don't think we honestly know, but I don't see the change happening fast enough, right? If we look at emissions in the state, they're not going down fast enough. They're barely going down. So we can set targets. We can say 2030. We can say 2040. But we need to be taking the steps. So it's up to us. Yeah, we can do a lot better. In my Diana.
And I think that's true. And the other side of that coin is it took us a long time to get where we are. We are not going to fix it in 10 or 15 years. I think that's very unrealistic. And I actually like the way you've presented this because you're asking us, first of all, what we can do personally in our own home, in our everyday, what we do every day, and do it slowly and do it wisely.
Right.
I think that is really the best approach. But I also sort of have a comment about the EVs and the batteries, which you didn't talk about the batteries.
Yep.
And because I know nothing, I'm not going to claim to know anything. But from what little I do understand, there's still a problem with disposing of these batteries. They're very toxic. And the other part about the battery is maybe perhaps the reason why these emissions aren't going down fast enough is you can't travel cross-country in an EV. Yes, you can stop to plug it in, but the infrastructure isn't there yet to have enough batteries across country. So I think, again, you have to be realistic. You say, yes, we want to get there. We all want a clean world. We all want a clean earth. But do it slowly, do it realistically. And I think you have presented that well.
Yep. Yeah, the EV charging infrastructure isn't quite there yet for most cars. It's there for Tesla because Tesla's actually built it, right? Because you can travel cross country and you can travel in a lot of cars, but that infrastructure has to be there for people to really feel comfortable owning an EV. Yep.
What about the batteries?
So,
What's the solution for that?
and your concern was disposal. So I think there's a big concern also with the mining, right, and getting the lithium, right, and I think half of Tesla's batteries now do not contain cobalt.
There's something else too that's even more concerned. What is it? Cobalt.
Oh, well, the lithium. Right? So, and yes, we have to do that sustainably. We have to do that humanely, absolutely. The disposal, I don't think is going to be an issue. There, interestingly, the former head of technology of Tesla, J.B. Straubel, has left Tesla years ago. He saw this battery, this stockpile of batteries coming, and started a company, Redwood Energy, and their business model is to take these batteries and recycle them, right? And interestingly, I saw an article about this recently. The batteries aren't coming offline as they expected. I mean, I've got a 9-year-old Tesla, 130,000 batteries. I'm going to hold on to that thing. At some point, it'll become sort of an around town car. But what'll happen is I mean, we don't know, but I think we need to make sure they get recycled, and I think people see the value in them, so that will happen. And secondly, what is happening in some places is they're getting repurposed. Right? It may not have enough capacity to power a car long distances, but you stack them up and you've got stationary storage, right? And it's good and it can have a significant role there.
There are a number of companies that are sponsored by the different car makers that are working on batteries with different electrolytes that don't use lithium at all.
Right.
And it's also made to be what they call solid state. It's not a liquid, and it makes the batteries safer. There's a less chance of a fire, and maybe in the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to be seeing these startup companies coming out with these new type of batteries, and that won't use any lithium at all in some cases.
Yep. You know, we've been making internal combustion engine cars for over 100 years, right? And they're really, really good now, right? They're really dependable, and I think of my car when I was growing up and cars now. They're just so good. Finally, we're investing in batteries and electric vehicles, right? And I have no doubt that our engineers and these car companies, and they will. But the other point that's important to me is I love stories about breakthrough technology, right? Of driving on roads that charge the battery, and parking and induction charging, and all these visions, and great new battery chemistries, right? Great, I hope we find them, but we actually don't need them, right? Lithium-ion batteries do the job, right? These cars are very functional, right? So I hope we're gonna have even greater breakthroughs, but let's not wait for them, right? Let's get going.
Your point about nuclear was well taken, but to me, the main thing about nuclear is we don't have any idea what to do with those rods once
the waste, right?
we're done with it. And so we pile them up, and they're anyhow. But we want to be sure we don't do that with lithium.
Right.
We want to be sure that we have a plan instead of, we'll figure that one out somewhere down the road.
I'm told Tesla recycles all their batteries. That's probably this J.B. Straubel, but you know what? We need to make sure it happens. We need to not allow it to those things to be.
If there's value to it, then people
Right.
will recycle it. But
Uh,
So Mark, the gentleman asked the question, is nuclear clean? So it's clean in the respect that it doesn't give any emissions,
Right.
but it's just as bad because of what the woman just said.
Waste.
It's the waste.
And low level.
Radioactive.
Radioactive.
You want to bury it, it
Yep.
doesn't go away for thousands of years.
Yep.
So the answer is no.
Camilla?
No.
I loved your slide on on food and how certain foods produce so much more, or take so much more, leave a larger carbon footprint than others. Is there a slide similar to that with regards to different types of transportation? Train versus automobile versus airplane versus whatever. You hear of people buying carbon offsets whenever they fly.
Yeah.
What's that all about? Is that a real solution or partial solution?
All right. I haven't seen that. Certainly public transit, if you're in a vehicle moving one person, that's going to be less efficient, or two people, that's going to be less efficient than in a bus or a train. So we all should seek alternative means of transport. I actually didn't add a slide, but we should get e-bikes. Connecticut passed a bill, the Clean Air Act, that includes a lot of things. It includes nice rebates. I think it's $500 for an e-bike. And they're a serious form of transportation, for those last couple of miles. It turns a bike into actually a serious form of transportation. But no, I haven't seen those numbers, but flying's a bad one, right? All right. So let's move on to what we can do as a community. And I work with our Clean Energy Task Force, or it's now called the Sustainability Committee in town. We meet monthly. You can find us on the town website. We'd love to have you come join us. And we've done various things, like I mentioned a solarized campaign that kind of just made solar a little easier to do. We got an installer, we streamlined the process, we had workshops, we had a live demonstration of an installation. So we're going to do some more of these things going forward. So expect a program on heat pumps, on solar, on battery storage, and really whatever you want. But we're going to try to have some more conversations like this. But the question is, what can we do as a community? And this goes to really the core of what PACE does and why we do what we do, and that is why local, right? We just talked a lot about what we have to do as individuals, right? Each of us is a lot we can do and we must do. At the national level, there's things that can only happen there, and at the state level. But locally, there are things that can happen at the town level that can happen best there, or can only happen there, right? We know each other. We know our leaders, right? We're not talking about some abstract concept. We're talking about solar on that school right there that my kids go to, right? We're talking about projects that we experience personally. And so I think and I've seen this again and again and again in our work at PACE, right? A group of engaged volunteers, citizens, can make a difference. In some of these towns, they have solar on every school. Some of them have none. Some of these towns have done successful efficiency campaigns. They've promoted heat pumps, right? So And I love this quote from Margaret Mead: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." And local actions have a visible impact. This is Simsbury's solar output. All right, it's not actually measured, it's estimated, but we looked at how many solar arrays got built. We had that data from the Green Bank. And you can look at how much solar we produce, and as we build more and more solar, well, something happened in 2014, didn't it? We did a campaign to promote solar. So boom, look at the difference, right? So we can have a real impact locally. And the other thing that's just so important, I think, is we can all swap out our light bulbs. We can all buy EVs or make smaller changes and change our diet. But as he says, the gorilla in the room is our society is dependent on fossil fuels, right? We're burning fossil fuels for heating, for transportation, for so many things. And we have to stop doing that. We have to limit our burning of fossil fuels. So let's look at ways that we as a community can do that. And there's a ton of numbers on this page that you don't need to even pay any attention to. So what I'm going to do is you really need to look at blocks. So what we've done is we've analyzed, this is what PACE does, Simsbury's energy usage. And the top block, you don't need to look at any single number, but that top block is our energy usage in Simsbury. And it's broken down by electricity, measured in kilowatt hours, gas heat, so natural gas, measured in hundreds of cubic feet, oil heat in gallons of heating oil, electric heat in kilowatt hours, other heat, and transportation in gallons of gas. So we could talk for a long time about how we did those calculations, but that's an estimate of how much energy Simsbury uses. And they're all in different units. We got kilowatt hours and gallons of gas. So the next block, and again, you don't need to look at any single number, but what that block does, it takes those different types of energy, puts them all into one common unit. In this case, it's gigawatt hours, so billions of watt hours, right? You could go BTUs, you could do other units, but we want to get them all comparable. Which you can see, the next group, again, don't concentrate on the numbers. All we've done is we've taken those and convert them to the equivalent greenhouse gas, the equivalent greenhouse gas emissions. So in this case, Simsbury produces counting these things, counting transportation, heating and cooling, electricity, gas. We're not talking about waste. We're not talking about agriculture. We're talking about just energy. Produces 229,000 tons of greenhouse gas, or about 9 tons per resident. We saw that slide before that we're probably around 15 or 16 overall. So if you count probably the other stuff, we're up in that neighborhood in Simsbury. 9 just from energy alone. And we saw that we should be trying to get to 2. So
Transportation is our largest.
yeah, transportation is usually about 40% of
In our little town.
yeah, gasoline. Yep. So the next thing we did was we have each of these. We know how much gas and electricity. So let's slap a price on there, and let's estimate. We spend $100 million a year in Simsbury on energy. We burn $100 million a year. Right? So that's a big number, or about $4,000 per resident in this case, right? So it's a lot. It's a lot of improvement that we can yield. So I'm going to move forward. Again, we're talking at the community level now. We were talking a few minutes ago at the personal level. It's the same vision. We are going to become more efficient. We are going to electrify. We are going to produce clean energy, and we're going to do it in a way that addresses the injustices that we've seen. This chart comes out of that, an energy model that PACE has built. And what it shows, if we go back just to these numbers, and again, the numbers don't mean anything, but we are using 815 gigawatt hours of energy. Now that number doesn't mean anything to anybody. It doesn't mean anything to me. What is interesting is the mix, as you were pointing to, Melissa. Of the 800, 300 is transportation. You got to add a couple here for heating and cooling. So you got about 40% from transportation, another 40% from heating and cooling. So that 800 or so, that's where we are today. So here's our 800 gigawatt hours of energy that we're using. And you can see that top piece is what is that? That's oil. Oil, so that's a heating oil. That's natural gas. That's gasoline, that's a big one. Those are our cars. And then this stuff is the electricity that we get from the grid. So where does the grid, what fuels does the grid use? So the grid has some non-renewable sources here. We've shut down our coal plant in Bridgeport, but we've got a bunch of gas-powered plants in Connecticut. So that's this. We've got a bunch of nuclear. That's the orange. And then we got a little bit of solar and wind in Connecticut. So that's where we are today. We're burning all these fossil fuels up here, and then the grid is this piece right here, right? Over time, what's going to happen, as we become more efficient, as we electrify, we're going to be using a lot less energy, right? And that looks like a very dramatic drop, but we continue to check that and recheck that, and we see those numbers as being possible. And over time, what's going to happen is we're going to stop burning oil. We're going to stop burning natural gas. We're going to stop burning gasoline because we're going to be driving EVs. And we're going to, from the bottom here, we're going to start deploying both grid wind, grid solar, and then some stuff locally. Right? And that's up to us to decide how much we want locally and where we want it. But in the end, we're going to be using a lot less, somewhere around 400, about half, and it's going to be all electric. Some of it's going to be from the grid, and some of it's going to be local. So that's sort of our path as a community toward this clean energy future.
So thinking commuterized, thinking hyper-localized, as I look at that huge chunk of gas that we use in our community, do we have any data on where we're using that gas? Is it on us going to Hartford to work? Is it on going to Vermont to ski? Are there things that we could do hyper-locally in Simsbury in terms of increased sidewalks, increased bike paths, to decrease our actual use of cars, and even without changing the EVs, changing the forms of transportation we use?
I think there were two questions there. One is can we reduce it by using alternative means of transportation? Absolutely, right? The more and we are a very bike-friendly community, but the more options we have, we don't have great options for public transit in town, but we could probably improve some things there. But yes, shifting towards alternative, lower emission transportation, absolutely. Now the data issue, do we know how much is trips? No. These are fairly, we could spend a long time talking about how we did the calculations, but it's an interesting topic because what we did, this is gasoline burned by vehicles registered in Simsbury, right? Not miles driven in Simsbury. There are actually some cool data sources out there. They're not reliable enough for us yet, but where, like Google actually measures miles traveled in various places, right? So,
I'd like to talk further about that.
Yeah.
I'd like to know where to put the sidewalks or where to invest in the bike racks.
Right, great. So this kind of show, and this is our energy model sort of projecting how Simsbury could envision this transition to a much more efficient, all clean economy. So to sort of summarize what that's going to look like, clean renewable energy will over time replace non-renewable. So we're gonna shut down our. I hope we built. I say the state blocked a natural gas power plant in Killingly. I think that's dead now. Right? So maybe we built our last gas power plant and everything. I mean, if you look at what new sources of power are being built, it's almost all solar and wind, right? So in the end, we will shut down our fossil fuel power plants and all of our energy from the grid is going to be coming from clean sources, right? Everything will be electric, some coming local and some from the grid. All of our transportation will be electric. We haven't talked about microgrids, but the electric grid, I can't remember, I think I have a slide on this. The electric grid is it's the most complicated system in the world, and it works incredibly well. But it was built 100 years ago, or longer, with big power plants, sending power in one direction out to the people. and they would use it, right? And then, the transportation grid, and then there's a distribution grid and substations and everything. Well, now we got people that consume energy. They also produce it. They have solar on the roof, and they're putting energy on the grid. Or you got a company of manufacturing that does combined heat and power. So they're producing and consuming. You've got storage out there. You've got flows of energy going in different directions. So the grid has to change. The grid has to become more adaptable. And one of the building blocks is microgrids, where we might, in Simsbury, for example, we tried to get one built. We were not successful, but we might take the water pollution control, the police station, some emergency shelter, put that on a microgrid that if the grid goes down, we could keep that running for a while still with solar and battery.
You know, it would be nice on that last scale that you have here, that diagram.
Yeah.
You can actually show what the carbon reduction is in each one of those years going forward.
Right.
Help convince people that you're on the right track.
That'd be cool. Yeah, we could superimpose that, put that line on there. Thank you. And so what can towns do, right? A lot of this is going to happen. But what can we do as a town? We talked about what we can do as an individual. What can we do as a town to actually move this forward? And there's a couple of things that we can do, and probably only can do at the town level. Energy efficiency. We can run a campaign. A lot of towns have done this. We did kind of a light one during the pandemic, but I think, if everybody, and I think we have a slide, I'll come back to this. If everybody, I think about 30% of Simsbury residents have gotten a HES audit. If that were 80%, and people actually then did the insulation and the attic ceiling and the all those things, that would make a huge difference. So we can promote energy efficiency right in town. Right? We can decide where we want to site renewables. We had a major, a large solar array that, as you know, was built in Simsbury. We didn't get to decide on it, right? Big projects like that go to the Connecticut Siting Council, right? But it was controversial. Some of you lived through that, right? Whereas 300 acres of land were taken up for former tobacco farmland. Not everybody wanted it. So what would be good is let's have that conversation. Where are we okay with solar in town? Where are we not okay, right? I think there are places where you want to say off limits there, right? Let's take some pieces of the land, the landfill, or let's, other undevelopable areas of land. Let's say, all right, we might even reach out to developers. So that's kind of our decision. How much of that do we want, or do we think we can responsibly, given the values that we have? So that's a conversation to have. We can ease the transition to electric vehicles. We can make sure that at least in town, we have the charging in the places that we need it. We can deal with issues like new construction and making new apartments electric vehicle capable. We can deal with taxation of electric vehicles. There's all kinds of things we can do at the town level to make electric vehicles just a little easier for people to move into. Heat pumps, a lot of education required here. Lot of education, and it's not a simple concept. So PACE, our nonprofit, has run campaigns in half a dozen towns now called Heat Smart, very much like a Solarize, where you educate, raise awareness about heat pumps. So I think that's something we're going to do going forward, is just to raise awareness so people understand this technology. And microgrids we talked about. Here we go. So we talked about efficiency and getting a HES audit. Get the audit, do the weatherization, get your heat pump. But this chart, the bars show how many residential efficiency programs Simsbury took part in, right? So again, we're paying for it. Our electric bill creates this fund. This fund then creates subsidies for energy audits, for heat pump rebates, for all these things. So you're paying for this. So you can see how many people, for example, in 2011, somewhere between about 175 people. The blue did HES audits, home energy solutions. The orange are HES IE, or HES income eligible. So that's lower moderate income, below a certain percentage of the median income, it's free. So that's the HES income eligible, or there's residential new construction. The lines show, the yellow line shows the cumulative percentage of Simsbury households who have done a HES audit. We're at about 30. The state is about 25. So we're doing a little better than the state. But 30s, everybody, at least everybody who owns their house should do a HES audit, right? It is the best deal in town, and it is probably the most impact, right? If you get it and then do the things that they recommend. So HES audits are great. They're a great value for money, and you can see some of the things that they'll do. It's a little tough right now because there's a backlog. I talked to somebody, they called a HES contractor, and they said, yeah, we'll get to there in July. I don't know if that's still the case, but we do have a backlog. And so we talked about this. Where do we want to site solar locally, right? That's really a question for us to decide in Simsbury, right? And we should do it before another developer comes with a proposal. Right? And some of the places, you may have been to the Simsbury Farms, the pool. I love that picture. That's the skating. That's the skating center roof. Tom Roy, our Director of Public Works, created mugs that said, using the sun to make ice. All right? And I don't think they could fit a single more panel on that roof. I think that's just great. This up here on the right is a little simulation of how much we could put on Stop and Shop and Hoyt's or Apple Cinema and Bob's in there. And here's a picture of a solar carport, solar canopy. All right? So where we should as a town have a conversation and say, where do we want solar? PACE did some really interesting work. We saw this Donnybrook in Simsbury about the Tobacco Valley Solar, right? People brought out their pitchforks and they said, we don't want this in my backyard, right? You read in the papers every once in a while, there's another protest or there's a public, the Siting Council and environmentalists are pitted against environmentalists because, yeah, we want clean energy, but don't take up our farmlands and don't cause erosion. So this is a real issue. So PACE started looking at, well, where else could we put solar if we can't do it on our farmland and forest? And we saw a really interesting study done in New York about how much you could put on solar parking lots, solar canopies. And so we actually did an analysis where we found a database of all impervious surfaces in the state, and we modeled how much solar could you fit on them. So we said, let's take parking lots of 100 parking spaces or more, so not the really small ones, and we modeled actually how much solar could you fit. And here in Simsbury, we ended up with 74 canopies. They could produce half of our electricity usage in Simsbury if we did that. Interestingly, so our study came out, we had an amazing graduate student from Yale that did this work, got a peer-reviewed academic paper. Interesting, I don't know how much his work had to do with it, but now the Shared Clean Energy Facility program and recently the commercial solar program in Connecticut gives preference to solar canopies. So they are a great, I don't know if you've ever seen one, we drove by some today. They provide shade, they protect from the elements. You can pair them very nice with storage. They cost more because you've got to build this structure, but you're not taking up farmland, you're not taking up forest. So I think we're going to see more solar canopies being built. Here's some examples of some locally grown artisanal electrons that we could be consuming. So the upper left is the high school, and we just said, what the heck? What if we? So we actually took this tool called helioscope. It's what a solar installer would use to sort of model to give you a quote for solar, and we modeled how much you could put at the high school, and it's you can see all along the east and the west parking lots. The upper right is Simsbury Commons. We saw it on the buildings before. Here's the parking lots. The lower left is Mitchell, Volvo, and Dodge. You can see the numbers there. But this is a significant resource we have in town of sort of already degraded real estate, right? Now, I'm not saying we want one in front of Hall or sprawled across the Ethel Walker lawn, but in the proper places, I think solar canopies have multiple benefits. And it looks like the economics are a little more favorable. We talked about environmental justice, right? And I just want to spend a minute there because when you start to look at all of the issues surrounding energy, there are communities, there are populations that have been disproportionately affected by either climate change and all of the energy infrastructure, right? They're living near these facilities. They're living in homes that are not efficient. They might be renting and in substandard. And as we make these changes, as we create programs to promote efficiency and to promote even electric vehicles, right? That's sort of, in the past, has been sort of a rich man's toy. Well, the new cheaper discounts is the Connecticut Hydrogen and Electric Auto Plan or something like that, rebate plan. It was just refunded, so it's the rebate you get when you buy an electric vehicle. I think they're a lot better now for lower and moderate income, right? Because this can't be just sort of a rich kid's toy, right? We need to, and the same thing for, the HES audits, they're free if you're low and moderate income. The rebates are even more favorable. And as we go into communities, we need to really remedy, we have an opportunity to not just, I think if we're not careful, we don't, we come into these questions about designing programs, and we're not mindful of the lived experience of some of the people in these communities. So I'm encouraged that, as I say, every meeting we're at, this is part of the agenda. Right? The last question that we try to answer with this model, this energy model, we saw this transition where we're going to be using less energy, we're going to be using electric for pretty much everything. The question is, can we afford it? Isn't that going to be really expensive? Right? And long story short, that model, we've got all this sort of calculations in the back. We saw this number. We spend $100 million a year on energy right now. That line right there says we could continue to spend $100 million every year. I'm no inflation, no growth here. So we could spend $100 million every year, just keep doing what we're doing. Right? Or we could take that money and start to build the world that we want, the economy that we want, right? And what that will entail is the green is let's start to invest in those renewables. Let's build the solar, let's build the wind, build the grid that we need. That's this green cost. The blue is the extra we're going to have to spend for that electric vehicle or for that heat pump, right? And we're basically paying that now in these subsidies and things. If we do that, we are going to pay more than that $100 million for a while. But eventually, our fuel cost, which is the big gorilla in the room, is going to go down. And eventually, we're in this downward curve, this technology curve that we know always goes down. The cost of solar goes down. The cost of batteries go down. We need to get onto that curve, but we're going to have to make some investments. If we do in the end, we're going to save a lot of money. We're going to save 30%, at least these calculations, right? A lot of assumptions in there, but it's a good faith effort at saying we can do this. And in the end, it's actually a better deal for us.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.